Welcome to the Value Builder Podcast, where we focus on real estate with a value-add mindset. Real strategies, real operators, real outcomes. Let's dive in.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm here with Heather Ewing. She's a CCIM, founder and CEO of Abstract Commercial Real Estate in Madison, Wisconsin. Heather has a fascinating story. She's not your typical commercial real estate broker. Marathon runner, I think has a lot of parallels with the commercial real estate, and we'll dive into that. She qualified for Boston Marathon, which is really fascinating, and she's specializing in retail restaurant deals, which is quite different than what I do, and I would like to learn about that. So what you will learn today, guys, it's about the mindset, how marathon training translates to commercial real estate success, the unique challenges of retail and restaurant brokerage in the smaller markets like Wisconsin, Madison, and how Heather makes it happen. So Heather, let's start with a question. Most brokers, I would say, they run from restaurant deals, and you lean into that. Can you maybe shed some light on it? Why is that, and how come you're so successful into this?
Well, first of all, Saul, thank you so much for having me on, and congratulations on your podcast. One of the things that really attracted me to restaurants in the beginning was that I've always loved eating, which also ties in with marathon running. The reason why I think a lot of people shy away from the restaurant deals is because they're very complicated and there's a lot of opportunities for the deal to go astray. And so with that, there's a lot of knowledge that you gain not only through infrastructure, but also a lot of the restaurant operators, if they're local or regional, it's a very heartfelt arena. It's been passed down, this knowledge of how to cook, these recipes from family, loved ones. And of course, on the larger scale with the national operators, they're churning and burning, and there's several restaurants. So the deal timeline is longer, and also the level of knowledge, it's more refined, and there's a lot of idiosyncrasy. So it's very detailed.
Makes sense. Now, so give me a flavor. So your typical restaurant deals, you mostly lean into your national QSRs, or you really also do, call it mom and pop small business restaurants? Where do you fall in that?
I actually work with both. So interestingly enough, with the fast casuals, it's a smaller footprint. And ever since COVID, right? We still talk about it, even though it's been several years. You're noticing a lot of the different footprints are reducing in size down to that 1,200, 1,500. Drive-throughs are still ideal. And when it comes to a full commercial restaurant, typically 5 or 6,000 square feet is very average. Of course, some of the larger national, you'll be at 12,000 or larger. So with that, it's a lot more infrastructure, and it's really understanding in those initial conversations, if it is a local mom and pop, where they're at financially. A lot of people have the dream, but they don't have the resources. So I like to understand if they are financially set for that, or if they have access to it. And if not, I like to give them a step or two so that they can work towards it. It is extremely costly compared to retail. And in that sense, too, you want to make sure that you're setting them up for success, and also the steps if they're not ready for it yet.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Now, I want to lean into another question. What's your take on working with brokers who are actually principals in the deal? From my experience, and that's just only my opinion, and I would like to hear yours, especially when we working on a deal that, like restaurants, or especially maybe local restaurants, where there is quite significant TI amounts, and maybe guarantees is not as strong as national tenants. My preference is to work with a broker who is a principal in deal, who has a reward on the outcome, but also has some skin in the game. But at the same time, when you focus on that, there's only limited amount of brokers who actually would like to be or want to be a landlords, and then maybe that's two different skill set. So my question to you, do you think every broker should eventually become a landlord? That's two different skill sets, and you should not mix them up. Where do you fall on that?
I see them as two different roles.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the landlords that I represent, they're hands off, and so they hire my firm abstract commercial real estate to come in and broker it. If you think about it, a lot of times the landlords are looking at the overall operations, they're looking at their returns, things of that nature. Due to the competition of the marketplace, you really need to be a solid broker and have a solid firm, or be a part of one that's solid. There's a lot of data that's being disseminated. The AI is increasing the pace of everything. It comes down to the relationships, understanding the market, the idiosyncrasies, and also what's off market and available and what isn't. And so with a lot of these different leases, I personally like to represent the landlord. The reason for that is I can make more money. They tend to be more direct, which I love. And also, they would not put it on the market if they didn't want to sell it or lease it. Typically, what I've noticed on the other end, whether it's a tenant or buyer, sometimes they're a little less in the space of really wanting to make it happen. They might be more so shopping. Although if they're in that zone, I don't like to work with them until they're ready to make a move. But it's really a finite amount of information, contacts, and keeping your ear to the ground. That's why I think it can work really well as two separate roles.
So it all makes sense. Yeah, you mentioned something about hands-off landlord. I hope I'm gonna be there at some point. I think maybe on my end, maybe I'm just a little bit more controlling, but at the same time, I think you just have too many scars in the past, especially when there's a huge amount of TIs and CapEx. If I don't get involved a lot of times, and they're just getting off the rails sometimes on budget. I guess, not to get in the weeds, my question to you, when you're bringing the tenant, and there is a massive capex, call it, I don't know, well, just, call it maybe $100 or $120 in TIs, and the landlord is hands off, and maybe we're not talking Starbucks, but maybe some regional or local restaurants. How do you see this TIs being watched and executed if landlord is hands off? Is that typically your firm is overseeing that everything would be done on time and overseeing GC or developer, or who is actually what I call driving the bus?
Right.
It's not only signing a lease, right? But they have to move in. And
Right.
and if everyone's hands off on that process, from my experience, it's a lot of brain damage.
And also, they have to move in and they have to successfully open, right?
Exactly.
So backing up, a lot of it is a good broker. I think it's really important to interview different brokerage firms if there isn't a clear winner that you want to work with. What that does is it allows you to understand their track record, and that's a great way to understand, is this really their niche? There's no fluff about the deals that you've done. I think it's really important to work with a broker within the asset class, because you can have industrial, office, all these different arenas, but it is not retail and it is definitely not restaurants. And that's where I see some of the muddy waters happening, is that you have a residential broker or maybe an industrial that wants to do a restaurant deal. They're very different and they're going to miss those nuances. And if you're hiring them on as the landlord, you're going to take the financial hit and probably end up with some issues, right? And so I think it's really important to do that due diligence, just like you do when you're scouting whether to buy a property or not, is to do the work up front, manage hard so you can live it out easily. And one is the firm. The second part with that, with TIs, the way that we do it is that it's the agreed upon per square foot, the allotments of payment, but then it's also taken care of through the escrow. And with that, all of the subs, all of the contractors have to provide lien waivers. That protects you as a landlord, and it also protects the client, because they don't have to wonder, was something done, was it not? There is a clear paper trail, and funds aren't released until all of the boxes are checked, which is really important. So that's a clean and efficient way. Something else, I'm jumping back here, but a good broker is also they're going to have a rigorous look into the restaurant that you might be bringing in. It's the past tax returns. It's payment on time. It's a couple of referrals. Sometimes it's even, what's the line of cash that they can access, right? Savings, commercial, anything. So it's making sure that they have a great track record and they also have access to funds, because restaurants are volatile, especially with the size, due to the overhead, because they are high rents. And that's also why, we like them as landlords or brokers, but also it adds a lot to the community. So I think one is always a financial interest, but two is how do you up level the community, create these experiences, and really put a great thumbprint on your community.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, that's definitely a skill that not too many brokers, I think, have it. No, when I say to myself a lot of times, actually, when you sign a lease, that's when the work starts. I understand there's a lot of work to sign a lease to hunt down the tenant and get everyone in line and get a meeting in the minds. But when you're signing the lease, especially if there is only a second or third store, if they haven't done it 50 times yet, that's that's a big job to get it moving and open.
And I also think the transition is really important of broker to landlord, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's the landlord directly or if they have a property management firm, having a
Hmm.
smooth transition, because just like if you're onboarding new employees, that's really important. That's their first experience of you. And if you think about it, some of these deals, they'll take over a year to negotiate
Yeah,
between finding the right property, negotiating all the different factors. And a lot of times they're meeting the landlord for the first time after
exactly.
the handoff. And with that too, you just want everything to go well. It's a long-term relationship. These are 10 plus year deals typically, and it's really important. And I think too, you want to have good relationship. As you know, real estate is all about relationships. And I think it's a great way for everyone to grow and increase their wealth and also enjoy life. It's a really nice circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one more thing, and one question I think came up to me right now, and that probably would be very valuable in terms of TIs, like a general rule of thumb. I think it depends probably on the market. The way you see, let's say, if the market is doesn't have growth, I think landlords are hesitant to give out any TI that's defined TIs to the local business, local restaurants. I think for national, it's much easier to get financing for that. Where does Madison fall? Is it typically you see landlords are open to call it, split the TIs of the restaurants, or are they trying to put everything on it? And from my perspective, what we do is we buy value add deals, and most of the time we're participating in TIs, even with local tenants. But do you have any rule of thumbs or advice to landlords or to listeners? What is that magic spot when you're not becoming first experiment, and a lot of experiments fail? But where is that kind of magic rule of thumb? How much you have to help and take the risk with the tenants. If there is any frameworks to teach us, would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. So I've always said, if you think about it, every tenant is a gamble, but there's also a very different level of risk and up or downside.
Hmm.
So with that in Madison, it really depends on the landlord. It also depends on the use. Retail is a different TI amount than restaurants. And the reason for that is tenant is putting us in a certain amount for retail, and for restaurant, they're putting in a lot more, especially if it's a raw space, meaning it wasn't built out prior. You have to start from scratch, and that's where the landlord will provide the landlord turnover conditions. And then that way the tenant can build from that with their contractor. And then typically in Wisconsin, we distribute everything from a tenant side. So with that, it's really understanding the tenant's credit. How much cash is on hand? How much do they have access to through a lender, through family, through partners, whatever it might be? And also, if they are new, is it a solid business plan? What is your feeling from them? And that's where, as a landlord or as a broker, working with people for months, whether I'm representing the landlord or the tenant, you get a pretty good feel of how solid their business acumen is, not only from what they've done in the past, but also in how they handle little bumps in the road, for strategic thinking, smaller thinking, all those different things. You start to get kind of a gauge on that. And then with TI, some landlords will give more than others. And a lot of it is how long has their space been vacant. I've negotiated deals for landlords where there was no TI and I got the tenant in. It's very infrequent, but it can and does happen. Another form that you can use is abated rent instead of the cash. Sometimes tenants, even if they're local regional, are in a better position where they can handle that. They can absorb the six-figure build out with the allotments, and they'll just take the free rent. So it really is different, a case by case, and it's also how solid is the tenant, because the more solid the tenant, the more the landlord is going to pay out typically, especially if it's a use that they like. And something I'd be curious about your market, Saul, is that in Chicago, what are you noticing as far as restaurants and what these different landlords are paying?
Yeah, so you see, I threw that question at you, and what I was processing, that's why this field will not be AI. It's just because it is such a big maze. You can't really put averages. There is no rule of thumbs. It's every single time still old school, meeting the tenant, yeah, getting the financials, getting guarantees, getting their balance sheet and stuff like that, but also feeling them, how likely that Jackie will succeed. And that's how much money and capital you want to invest into them. It's always a gamble, so to speak, but it goes beyond balance sheets, 2 stores or 3 stores. And on my end, it varies. Sometimes it's abatements, sometimes it's only a white box, and sometimes it is, right now, let's say we're doing a deal with Chamber of Commerce, and it's $1 million build out close to, and we're rolling dice because we believe in them, right? And we're taking that TI money on our guarantees from lenders, so it really varies. Sometimes there is nothing, sometimes $1 million,
Right.
and sometimes it's the different balance sheets, but you have different belief, different weight in community from trust. Now, how likely Chamber is going to fail? Very, very little, very little. That happens, but it's probably way less likely than another taco restaurant if it's the first one. But from our perspective, we have 3 things that we always try to communicate internally to tenants. That we always open to tenant improvements. We will have the most affordable rent, and we're all about for raving fan culture for our tenants. We're most of the time hands-on, and we invest in those spaces. Yeah, but I don't have rule of thumb. Like I threw a question at you, so there is no rule of thumb. It's 50-50, 25. There is no like that. No, every single time is different. Every single time is.
And I think also landlords, developers will have different goals, right? Some really want a highly curated grouping of tenants. And with that, it typically takes longer and you have to reach a little bit further.
Exactly.
But that can also cost more than if you're just trying to fill it in. Each investor is different, as you know. And
Exactly.
it's really understanding clearly what their goals are. So myself as a broker, then I can line it up and bring it in, and then that way everyone wins.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, but that's a really great advice. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Let's dive in into marathons. And I shared you briefly, before our call that my first marathon was also in Chicago. That was 2006, I believe, and I've
That's
done 3 of
great.
those. And yeah, it was really, really amazing race. I enjoyed it so much. I still do have actually a photo of it in my basement gym.
I love it. You'll have to post it.
Yeah, I
Post it
probably
on
should. Exactly.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's a great
Yes,
idea. Maybe I'll to use like a thumbnail for the podcast.
definitely.
And yeah, I unfortunately haven't done it for quite some time because of my knees. But I would like to dive into your story. So, if you can you share what do you think there is the similarities between commercial real estate and marathons? Because I think it does, but I would like to hear your take on it.
Definitely. Well, I agree completely. I think they're symbiotic and I think they both really fuel each other. At least that's been my experience. And Chicago will be my number 10, which
Oh
is
my
neat.
God!
So I've been
Congratulations.
running internationally and domestically. It was really neat. I did run Chicago 2 or 3 years ago. And for this year, that I actually got a letter to me, an invite, so that I didn't have to go through the lottery. And I was like, oh,
Well, you're
boy.
being very humble. So I know
I was like, I will be there.
Well,
I still had to pay.
yeah, my hunch is just because we have really good timing. I don't think Chicago, just in my people, just because I remember it wasn't well, we qualified for Boston, so obviously you run fast. Do you
Yeah.
mind sharing what was your best time?
My best time is a 8:45 minute, and I'm
Wow,
51.
that's
So,
that's fast.
yeah,
That's
thank God
amazing.
they drop the times down as you get older, which is great.
Yeah.
But, yeah, for me, marathoning, as I go back, I've been into fitness. I had a life-altering car accident in my 20s and was given a second chance at life. And that's something that I've really held deep in my heart and also has really given me a zest for living fully. And I ask myself each day of how can I live even more fully? And how do I help others do this through commercial real estate and being active? And with that, in 2019, I had my brother and sister-in-law were like, "Hey, we're running New York. You want to join us?" And I was like, "Let me sleep on it," because I ran one marathon 17 years prior and I hated it. So I said, never again. And so fast forward, it's 2019, and I decided, I had ran about 24 half marathons at that point. And I just said, you're getting too comfortable, Heather. It's time to shake it up, go back into the unknown. So that's what I did. And what was interesting was through that training process, it just broke down some of the inner barriers and some of the stories that we tell ourselves, right? The
Hmm.
self-limiting beliefs.
Yes.
And I ran it and I loved it, right? I was in ton of pain, but I had never been to New York at that point. You go through each of the boroughs, you have all these people
Hmm.
cheering, this 100+ bands. It was amazing. And something else woke up with inside of me at that point too. And I was just like, I think there's more for me in commercial real estate.
Mm.
So fast forward April 2020, I opened the doors to abstract commercial real estate. And you couldn't have opened at a worse time, right? Everything shut down. The nice thing is I say challenge can give you wings. And that's what that experience did for me. Of I started a new business and grew it. And that's really an energy that I like to share with others too, is it's all mindset and perception. So I kept running because it was a great way to offload stress in commercial real estate or any arena. And it was one of those that the miles just kept adding up, as did the marathons. And what I love about it is that when you train for a marathon, you see you've got a 4-month block and it feels daunting. I think no matter how many you've done, because you want to keep up leveling.
Exactly. Always
Just like
compete
some of
yourself.
these deals, right? They're 8 months, they're 15 months, they're longer, especially if you're rezoning and tearing down and municipal approvals and building an extra 12 stories. So you have the ability to see a big picture, break it down into pieces, and also pacing is really important for it, just like in our deals.
Hmm.
You you see brokers go out strong and then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh yeah, that's right, they're no longer in the industry. They
Exactly.
blew up." And also with it is the endurance mindset. You know that there's going to be hills and running
Hmm.
or times where you're just really tired, maybe you didn't sleep well or whatever it might be. And in the commercial real estate deals, maybe a contractor exited. I mean, I had one, I was just about having the lease signed, and all of a sudden he sold his business and now we need a contractor. It was just, you can't plan for things in life, just like in marathons. So it's adapting, and it's a confidence that you take day in commercial real estate and also in your running, that you have a solid base, you created a plan, you're working towards that plan, but you know the unexpected can and will happen. And you have the confidence knowing that you've always navigated it through asking the right questions, working with your resources, all of those different factors. So it helps you get up over those hills and valleys. And I think too, anytime you want to up level, like in commercial real estate, I wanted to take my career to the next level as I had started my firm. That's when I tested for my CCIM designation. Just as in marathon training, I now have a strength coach and I also have a coach that helps me with all my planning.
There you go.
And so it's seeking wise counsel. You go to people that are the best in their arenas and you get help from that. Just like with anyone in commercial real estate, I say, don't ask the person that isn't succeeding. Ask the person that you would love to be in 5, 10, 20 years and seek wise counsel. So as you can see, these are just a few, but there are so many parallels. And I also think how we fuel our bodies, water intake, food, real food, all these different things, it makes for a great marathon. And it also gives you great energy in commercial real estate. And it's just, they're so intertwined in my mind that the more marathons, the more deals I broker, they really, the two are one.
That's great. Yeah. And while you're talking, I was thinking about my experiences. And very similar.
Right.
I don't do that much endurance training like I used to do before. I used to do triathlons, Ironman,
Right.
and stuff like that. I still do bike rides on weekends.
That's great.
But I remember when I used to run like every single day, it's really a like chemical hack. When you wake up in the morning, there's a million problems facing you. And I remember as soon as you run, it was early in the morning, like 7 o'clock, you're just getting that zone 3 high, full coffee, and you right away, you don't see that mountain of problems. That mountain just becomes smaller and just chipping away those small items. And it becomes so much easier if you do that. I remember that if I fall of the training for a week or so or two, that mountain becomes much bigger just kind of, go after it. But once you're in that chemical hack of that zone 3 high after coffee, you just plow through it. At the end of the day, you climb the mountain. So
Well, and
that's what I remember.
it illustrates the power of consistency.
Yeah,
When you're in forward motion, it's a lot easier versus when you're out for several months, right? Just like
exactly.
with prospecting, or maybe for some it's networking. If you just keep doing small amounts, it's amazing how it compounds. I always think of James Clear, and I listen to his,
Mhm.
his Atomic Habits once a year. I think it's just one of those evergreen books that I'll always cherish. 1% better. And it's one of the quirky things about me, but I love leaving all of my tennis shoes at the entrance of the door. There's something that just warms my heart with it. And also, I think the reason for that is that I know that I'm delivering to myself. And I think a lot of us in commercial real estate have very big hearts. And I think we're always trying to provide for others and please customers, clients, tenants, whatever it might be, that sometimes it's easy to leave ourselves behind. And I think, the commitment to running just really fuels all that. And I think kind of like what you had shared with your Ironman, of it breaks down barriers. I had 8 200-meter hill repeats, and I didn't run in high school. I didn't run in college. I was never on a team like that. Little bits occasionally over the years. Man, I was joking. I'm like, is my coach trying to kill me? I'm like, I'm 51, not 21. Right? But I did the 8 repeats, and I thought my heart was gonna come out of my chest, but I cannot tell you the extreme high, and that had a profound impact just in my entire essence of being. I mean,
Exactly.
there were tears of joy, fully
Yeah.
transparent. I was bawling like a baby because I had broke a barrier that I thought was impossible, and 2, I was like, "Oh my god, what does this open up for my life?" So
Yeah. You
that
probably have
translates right into deals and everything else.
You probably had that experience. I can correlate my biggest wins and biggest deals actually post big races. Somehow it always had a correlation. You come out of the race, you get off of the heavy endurance training, but you still have that oomph and that amazing energy. And
Yep.
somehow then at least in my experience, I always was able to channel that energy, you know, somehow to overcome or get those massive accomplishments. And when it comes to real estate, now I don't know if you saw that, but I can really correlate it in timeline.
Definitely. And I can too. And I think that's why I keep doing it. And I think it's one of those, if you think about it with your Ironman training once or twice a day, you don't want to skip it. Like there's always that
No, you can't.
little
You're gonna
voice in the
die if you're
background of
gonna
like,
not
God, it'd
gonna
be
do
really
it.
nice to lay on the couch and watch Netflix or just go hang out with, so and so. We're just hang out at this event. But you know that when you put your toe at the start, you want every ounce of confidence that you've developed over those past several months. And that's also why I have like a 99% accuracy of following my plan, because the difference of showing up feeling you've done everything in your power is what I shoot for, because it's not fun. Your mind can play a lot of games on you. And I know for me in a sub 4 and for an Ironman, it's so much longer. You don't want that voice hanging
Oh yeah,
out. You want the
exactly.
champion and the coach.
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, that's great. No, thanks for sharing that. All right.
Yeah.
On our last section, I would like to pivot to a rapid fire questions. And if I may, I have a few.
Let's do
So
it.
if any of the listeners would like to get a bad piece of advice from you, if they want to specialize in retail, what is the most important for them? If they want to go retail specialization, and what do you think that's the key skill they have to learn, or mindset? What would be the best piece of advice?
The best piece of mindset to get into retail real
Yeah.
estate,
Mm-hmm.
know the
In retail
market.
specific.
Know the market. Put those tennis shoes on, get out, talk to tenants, reach out to the landlords, foster those connections. I think good old fashioned door knocking per se is a big winner. I'm still also a big advocate of cold calling using social media, networking, video. I think a wide array is great, because the more you understand about retail and or restaurants, the better you're going to be. And then the brokerage end of it is separate, because it's really understanding the fundamentals of the LOI, the negotiation points, how hard to push, when to back off, and creating the team for the build outs, working with the city if you're rezoning. Do your homework.
Makes sense. Awesome. 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 All right. Next one.
Yeah.
What one thing about Madison market that would surprise people? That's one maybe not known fact, or what would be the surprising thing about Madison?
We love to eat and drink and shop.
Okay.
There's a lot of cranes in the sky right now in downtown Madison, and the projected growth is off the charts, which is great. So with that, there's a lot of developers that are coming in from out of state. Chicago, California is a lot of developers that I work with, and also the South. And with that, it's timing. And sometimes people will talk about interest rates and get stuck on all of that, but it doesn't matter what the interest rate is if you don't have access to buy.
Exactly.
Timing matters.
That's for sure, for sure. All right, Heather. So I always like to finish up with our traditional personal question, and you can take a pass if it gets too personal, but our listeners absolutely love it. So usually I pull it from these cards. They
I
called
like it.
myintent.org. So the question this time is, what can you do today that you could not do a year ago?
I would say 1 is double-digit marathon
All
training,
right.
but 2, selling the investment sales. And that's something that I've been transitioning into since I got my CCIM. And so I think this year has been definitely a trajectory of growth in different ways, but also deepening relationships further.
Thank you, Heather, for joining our show. For the listeners, if they want to find you, if they have a need in Madison, Wisconsin, we have the building to sell, or we have of their tenant. Where can I find you?
Definitely. At Heather Ewing on LinkedIn, or I am offering a triple net leasing masterclass right now that begins September 9th, and it's abstractcommercialrealestate.com/masterclass.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather. Really appreciate it for joining the show.
Thank you, Saul. It was a true joy.
You've been listening to the Value Builder podcast. For more strategies, stories, and episodes, head to valuebuilder.co or subscribe on your favorite app. Always make it better than you found it and keep adding value. See you in the next one.